The dust kicked up by Samuel Morrison's horse settled slowly in the scorching afternoon heat as he dismounted outside the Broken Wheel Saloon. His weathered hands shook as he tied the reins to the hitching post, and sweat mixed with grime streaked down his face despite the cool October air of 1887. The once proud rancher looked nothing like the man who had built the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. His clothes hung loose on his frame, his eyes were sunken with exhaustion, and desperation clung to him like morning fog. Inside the saloon, the usual crowd of cowboys, drifters, and local businessmen turned their heads as Morrison pushed through the batwing doors. The piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys for a moment before resuming their tinny melody. Conversations died mid-sentence as all eyes fixed on the man who had once been their unofficial king. Morrison walked straight to the bar, his spurs jangling with each heavy step. The bartender, a burly man named Dutch, set down the glass he was cleaning and waited. Morrison's voice, when it finally came, carried across the suddenly silent room like a death knell. "I need help," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My ranch is finished unless I can find 3 particular women. I'll pay anything to the person who can bring them to me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Men exchanged glances, some amused, others curious. Dutch leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the polished wood of the bar. "What kind of help are we talking about, Sam?" Dutch asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. Morrison's hands gripped the edge of the bar until his knuckles turned white. "The Crimson Creek gang hit my place 3 nights ago. They took everything. My cattle, my horses, my money, and..." His voice cracked. "They took my daughter, Rebecca." The silence that followed was complete. Even the piano had stopped. Rebecca Morrison was known throughout the territory, not just as the rancher's only child, but as a woman of exceptional beauty and spirit who had turned down marriage proposals from half the eligible men in the state. "They left me this," Morrison continued, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his vest pocket. "Says they want $50,000 in gold, or they'll sell her to the highest bidder in Mexico. I've got 30 days. Old Pete, a grizzled prospector nursing a whiskey at the end of the bar, spat into the brass spittoon. "50,000? Hell, Sam, that's more money than most of us will see in 10 lifetimes." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "I know. The gang cleaned me out. Burned my house, scattered my herd, and killed most of my men. I've got maybe $500 left to my name." "So how do you figure to get 50,000? asked Jim Bradley, owner of the general store. Morrison straightened, and, for a moment, something of his old authority returned to his voice. "There are 3 women who can save me. 3 women who have skills I need. The problem is, they all have reasons to hate my guts." He turned to face the room, his eyes scanning the faces of men who had once sought his favor and approval. "First is Elena Vasquez. Best tracker and scout in the territory. She can find the gang's hideout when no one else can. Second is Catherine Cat O'Malley. There isn't a lock she can't pick or a safe she can't crack. And third is Dr. Margaret Hartwell. If anyone can keep us alive long enough to get Rebecca back, it's her." Dutch whistled low. "Those are 3 names I haven't heard together in a while. Didn't you run Elena out of town about 5 years back?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "I did what I thought was right at the time. Her brother was rustling my cattle." "And Cat O'Malley?" asked Bradley. "Wasn't she the one you had arrested for stealing from your safe?" "She was stealing to pay for her sick mother's medicine," Morrison admitted. "I pressed charges anyway." "She spent 6 months in territorial prison." Young Tommy Henderson, barely old enough to shave, piped up from a corner table. "What about Dr. Hartwell? What did you do to her?" Morrison's shoulders sagged. "Margaret was the woman I was supposed to marry. I left her at the altar for Rebecca's mother. Broke her heart and ruined her reputation. She had to leave town to rebuild her life." The room erupted in a mixture of whistles, curses, and disbelieving laughter. Dutch shook his head slowly. "Sam, you've got some brass coming in here asking for help finding women you wronged. What makes you think any of them would lift a finger to help you?" Morrison reached into his other pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper. Because I have something they want more than revenge. This is the deed to my ranch. 20,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory, plus mineral rights. It's worth more than the 50,000 I need to pay the ransom. He held up the deed so everyone could see it. I'm willing to sign this over to the three women in equal shares if they help me get my daughter back. They can have everything I've spent my life building. The saloon fell silent again. Morrison's ranch was legendary, stretching from the river valley to the mountain foothills, with natural springs and some of the richest grassland anyone had ever seen. Men had killed for far less. You're talking about giving up everything you own, Dutch said quietly. Your life's work. Morrison's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. My daughter is my life's work. Everything else is just land and cattle. Rebecca is all I have left of her mother, and I'll be damned if I let those animals sell her into slavery. An older man in a black suit, whom everyone recognized as banker Jeremiah Hoskins, stepped forward. Sam, even if you could find these women, even if they agreed to help, how do you plan to track down the most dangerous gang in 3 territories? The Crimson Creek gang has been robbing trains and banks for 2 years, and the law hasn't even come close to catching them. Morrison turned to face Hoskins directly. Because Elena Vasquez tracked them once before. 3 years ago, when they hit the Butterfield stage outside Apache Wells. She followed their trail for 200 miles through desert and mountain country before the territorial marshal called off the pursuit. She got closer to them than anyone ever has. But she refused to take the job, Hoskins pointed out. Said tracking killers for white men's justice wasn't worth her time. This isn't about justice, Morrison replied. This is about saving an innocent girl's life. And Elena has a daughter of her own now. She might understand what I'm going through. Tommy Henderson leaned forward in his chair. What about Cat O'Malley? Last I heard, she was running cons in San Francisco. How you planning to find her? Morrison had clearly thought this through. Cat's mother is buried in the cemetery here. Every year on the anniversary of her death, Cat comes back to put flowers on the grave. That's in 2 weeks. She'll be here. And Dr. Hartwell? Dutch asked. She's running a medical practice in Denver now. Built quite a reputation for herself treating gunshot wounds and frontier injuries. If I can get word to her that lives are at stake, she might come. Old Pete coughed and spat again. You're talking about assembling a team of women to take on the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. Even if they agree to help, which seems unlikely as hell, how do you figure 4 people can succeed where the army and federal marshals have failed? Morrison's expression grew hard. Because we won't be trying to bring them to justice. We'll be trying to get close enough to pay the ransom and get Rebecca back alive. Different mission, different tactics. 50,000 in gold, Bradley mused. That's a lot of weight to transport. Where would you even get that kind of money? Morrison looked around the room one more time. I've got a plan for that too, but first I need to know if anyone here will help me find these 3 women. I'm offering $1,000 to anyone who can bring Elena, Kat, or Margaret to me within 2 weeks. $1,000 was more than most working men made in 2 years. The room buzzed with sudden interest. I'll ride out to Elena's place, volunteered Jake Sampson, a young cowboy known for his tracking skills. Heard she's living up near Widow's Peak with her daughter. I can send a telegram to Denver, offered Hoskins. I've got banking contacts there who can locate Dr. Hartwell. And I'll keep an eye out for Cat O'Malley, said Dutch. She always stayed here when she was in town. Morrison nodded gratefully. There's something else you all need to know. The Crimson Creek gang isn't just holding Rebecca for ransom. Their leader, Black Jack Cordova, has a reputation for taking wealthy men's daughters as brides. If I don't get that money together in 30 days, he might decide to keep her permanently. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew what happened to women who caught the attention of men like Black Jack Cordova. What's your plan for getting the 50,000? Dutch asked. Morrison hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. The Denver Pacific Railroad is shipping a gold payroll through here next week. 100,000 in federal gold, heading to the Army post at Fort Carson. The room went dead quiet. Morrison was talking about robbing a train. Sam, Hoskins said slowly, you're talking about federal crime. That's not rustling cattle or cheating at cards. That's the kind of thing they hang men for. Morrison's laugh was harsh. They've already taken everything from me. My home, my livelihood, my daughter. What's left for them to take? Your life, Dutch said quietly. My life isn't worth living without Rebecca. Morrison's voice carried absolute conviction. I've made mistakes, hurt people, put my own interests ahead of everyone else's. But I won't let my daughter pay for my sins. Young Tommy stood up from his table. Mr. Morrison, I knew your daughter in school. She was always kind to everyone, never put on airs despite being the richest girl in town. If there's anything I can do to help bring her home safe, just say the word. Morrison's composure finally cracked. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he gripped the bar for support. Thank you, son. That means more than you know. What about the law? Asked Bradley. Shouldn't we contact the territorial marshal? Morrison shook his head. I already tried. Marshal Williams said his men are spread too thin to mount a rescue operation. He suggested I pay the ransom if I could raise the money through legal means. 50,000 through legal means in 30 days, Dutch mused. That'd be a neat trick. Morrison straightened up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I know what I'm asking is dangerous and probably illegal. I know I have no right to expect help from any of you, considering how I've treated people over the years. But I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for an innocent girl who never hurt anyone in her life. The saloon remained quiet except for the ticking of the clock over the bar. Finally, old Pete spoke up. Sam, I've known you for 20 years. You've been a hard man, sometimes a cruel one. But you've also been fair in your business dealings, and you've never been known to break your word. If you say you'll sign over your ranch to these 3 women, and if they're willing to help, then I say we should do whatever we can to help you bring your girl home. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Morrison looked around the room with something approaching hope in his eyes. I'll need supplies, he said. Horses, weapons, provisions for at least 2 weeks on the trail. I can help with that, offered Bradley. Won't charge full price, considering the circumstances. And I can spread the word to other towns, said Dutch. Maybe someone else has seen Elena or knows where to find Kat before she shows up here. Morrison nodded gratefully. There's one more thing. If we do this, if we somehow manage to get Rebecca back, I want everyone to know that any man who helped will have a place on my ranch for as long as he wants it. That is, assuming the 3 women don't throw me off at first. The room erupted in nervous laughter, breaking some of the tension that had built up during Morrison's desperate speech. As the crowd began to disperse, men already making plans and discussing the logistics of finding 3 women scattered across the territory, Morrison remained at the bar nursing a whiskey that Dutch had poured him. His mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that lay ahead. Elena Vasquez was proud and independent, with good reason to hate him for accusing her brother of rustling and driving them both out of town. She was also the best tracker anyone had ever seen, capable of following a trail over rock and through running water. Catherine O'Malley was brilliant and resourceful, but she was also a convicted thief with a grudge against him that went bone deep. Still, her skills with locks and safes might be crucial if they had to break into wherever the gang was holding Rebecca. And Margaret Hartwell was the woman he had loved and betrayed, choosing a younger, prettier wife over the steady, intelligent doctor who had planned to spend her life beside him. She had medical skills that could mean the difference between life and death on a dangerous mission. 3 women, each with her own reasons to want him to suffer. 3 women who might be the only hope his daughter had of coming home alive. As Morrison stared into his whiskey glass, he wondered if a man could truly change, or if the weight of his past mistakes would doom them all. Elena Vasquez heard the approaching horse before she saw it through the morning mist that clung to the mountain meadow. She set down the bucket of milk she had been carrying from the goat pen and reached for the rifle that was never far from her side. Living alone with her 8-year-old daughter Maria in the remote cabin near Widow's Peak, she had learned that visitors usually meant trouble. The rider who emerged from the tree line was young Jake Sampson, and Elena recognized him as one of the cowhands from the valley below. She kept her rifle ready but didn't aim it at him as he approached the cabin. "Elena Vasquez?" Jake called out, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." Elena's dark eyes studied him carefully. At 32, she had learned to read men quickly and accurately. Her Apache grandmother had taught her that survival depended on understanding what people wanted before they asked for it. This young cowboy wanted something badly enough to ride alone into mountain country where few white men dared to venture. "State your business and be quick about it," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had spoken Spanish before English. "My daughter will be waking soon, and I don't want her frightened." Jake dismounted and approached slowly, his hat in his hands. "It's about Samuel Morrison's daughter. Rebecca Morrison was taken by the Crimson Creek Gang 3 days ago." Elena's expression didn't change, but her grip on the rifle tightened slightly. "Samuel Morrison's troubles are not my concern. He's offering $1,000 to anyone who can bring you to town to hear his proposal," Jake continued. "And he says he'll sign over his entire ranch to you and 2 other women if you help him get his daughter back." For the first time, Elena showed surprise. The Morrison Ranch was legendary throughout the territory, and 20,000 acres of prime land would be worth a fortune. But her expression hardened again almost immediately. "Samuel Morrison drove my family from our home based on lies," she said. "My brother Carlos never stole his cattle. We proved that when we found the real rustlers 2 months later, but Morrison never apologized, never admitted his mistake." Jake nodded uncomfortably. He remembered the incident, though he had been too young and low in the ranch hierarchy to know all the details. "He admits he was wrong about your brother, Elena. He's a desperate man who knows he's made mistakes." "Desperate men are dangerous," Elena replied. "What makes him think I would risk my life and my daughter's safety to help him?" "Because his daughter is innocent," Jake said simply. "And because you're the only person who ever got close to tracking down the Crimson Creek Gang." Elena was quiet for several minutes, her eyes scanning the forest around her cabin. This was her sanctuary, the place where she and Maria had built a new life after being driven from their home in the valley. She had sworn never to involve herself in the conflicts of white men again. "How long does he have?" she asked finally. 30 days to raise $50,000 in gold, or they'll sell her into slavery in Mexico." Elena's jaw tightened. She had heard stories about what happened to women taken by men like Black Jack Cordova. No matter what she thought of Samuel Morrison, his daughter didn't deserve that fate. The cabin door creaked open, and 8-year-old Maria emerged, rubbing sleep from her dark eyes. She was a beautiful child, with her mother's high cheekbones and quick intelligence, and her father's green eyes. Elena had never told her daughter who her father was, but she sometimes caught the girl staring at her own reflection with questions she was too young to ask. "Mama?" Maria said in Spanish. "Who is the man?" Elena answered in the same language. "A messenger, little one. Go inside and start breakfast. I'll be in shortly." Maria nodded and disappeared back into the cabin, but Elena had seen her studying Jake's face with the same careful attention she herself used when evaluating strangers. The girl was learning to be cautious, which was good, but Elena worried about what kind of world she was preparing her daughter for. "The other 2 women," Elena said, turning back to Jake. "Who are they?" "Catherine O'Malley and Dr. Margaret Hartwell," Jake replied. "Morrison says he needs a thief and a doctor to complement your tracking skills." Elena knew both names. Cat O'Malley had a reputation as one of the most skilled thieves in the territory, and Dr. Hartwell was spoken of with respect even among the Apache bands. Both women had reasons to hate Samuel Morrison, just as Elena did. 3 women against the most dangerous gang in 3 territories, Elena mused. "Morrison must be more desperate than I thought." "He is," Jake confirmed. "I've never seen a man so broken. He's willing to give up everything he owns just for the chance to get his daughter back. Elena was quiet again, thinking. The smart thing would be to send Jake away and forget this conversation ever happened. She had a peaceful life here with Maria, away from the violence and betrayal that seemed to follow white men wherever they went. But $50,000 in ransom money meant the gang would be heavily armed and extremely dangerous. If Morrison tried to rescue his daughter with inexperienced help, both he and Rebecca would likely end up dead. If I were to consider this, Elena said slowly, I would need guarantees about my daughter's safety. She would not come on this mission, and she would need to be protected while I was gone. Jake's face brightened with hope. Morrison said he'd arrange for any family members to be kept safe. He's not asking anyone to risk their loved ones. Elena studied the young cowboy's earnest face. He believed what he was saying, but Elena had learned not to trust the promises of desperate men. Still, the image of Rebecca Morrison being sold to Mexican slavers bothered her more than she wanted to admit. I'll need to speak with the other women first, Elena said finally. If Cat O'Malley and Dr. Hartwell agree to this madness, then I'll consider it. Jake grinned widely. I'll tell Morrison you're interested. He'll be grateful beyond words. Don't mistake consideration for agreement, Elena warned. I haven't decided anything yet. And tell Morrison that if I do agree to help, it won't be because I forgive him for what he did to my family. It will be because an innocent girl doesn't deserve to suffer for her father's sins. Jake nodded seriously. I understand. Is there anything you need me to tell him? Any conditions or requirements? Elena thought for a moment. Tell him that if we do this, we do it my way. No interference from him or his men. And tell him that the first time he lies to us or withholds information, I walk away and he never sees me again. I'll tell him, Jake promised, mounting his horse. Elena, I know Morrison wronged your family, but Rebecca Morrison never hurt anyone. She used to teach reading to children who couldn't afford schooling, including some Apache kids from the reservation. She's a good person. Elena watched Jake ride away down the mountain trail, his words echoing in her mind. She had heard stories about Rebecca Morrison's kindness, which made the situation even more complicated. It was easier to hate Samuel Morrison when she could dismiss his entire family as privileged and uncaring. Inside the cabin, Maria was frying eggs and beans for breakfast. She looked up when her mother entered, her green eyes bright with curiosity. Was that about work, Mama? Maria asked. She knew her mother sometimes took jobs as a tracker for the territorial government, though Elena tried to keep the dangerous aspects of her work hidden from her daughter. Perhaps, Elena said, ruffling Maria's dark hair. But nothing is decided yet. We may be taking a trip to visit your grandmother soon. Maria's face lit up. She loved visiting Elena's mother, who lived with Elena's sister in a small town near the Mexican border. The older woman told wonderful stories and spoiled Maria with sweets and attention. As they ate breakfast together, Elena's mind was already working on the logistics of the situation. If she agreed to help Morrison, she would need to get Maria to safety first. Then, she would need to study everything she could learn about the Crimson Creek gang's methods and patterns. Most importantly, she would need to understand exactly what kind of women she would be working with. Catherine O'Malley was notorious for her quick wit and quicker temper. She had grown up on the streets and learned to survive by being smarter and more ruthless than the men who tried to control her. Elena respected that kind of strength, but she also knew that Kat's hatred for Morrison ran deep. Dr. Margaret Hartwell was a different challenge altogether. She was educated, sophisticated, and had every reason to want Samuel Morrison to suffer for humiliating her. But she was also a healer, sworn to preserve life. Elena wondered if that oath would extend to helping the man who had broken her heart. 3 days later, Elena received word that Cat O'Malley had arrived in town early for her annual visit to her mother's grave. Dr. Hartwell had also responded to Morrison's telegram and was traveling by train from Denver. The meeting would take place in 2 days at the Broken Wheel Saloon. Elena spent those 2 days preparing. She arranged for Maria to stay with her sister, told her daughter that she was going on a tracking job for the territorial marshal, and gathered her equipment. Her rifle, her father's old Colt revolver, ammunition, dried food, and the tools of her trade. Most importantly, she studied the maps of the region where the Crimson Creek gang was most likely to have taken Rebecca Morrison. The gang preferred to operate in the Badlands between territories, where jurisdiction was unclear and the terrain was too rough for large posses to follow. Elena had tracked them once before, following their trail through desert canyons and mountain passes that would challenge even experienced Apache warriors. She had gotten close enough to observe their camp, close enough to count their numbers and study their habits, before the territorial marshal had called off the pursuit. What the marshal hadn't known was that Elena had continued tracking them on her own for 3 more days. She had mapped their supply routes, identified their water sources, and discovered the location of at least 2 of their hideouts. She had been preparing to report her findings when news reached her that the gang had already moved on to rob a train in Colorado. Now, 3 years later, that knowledge might be the key to rescuing Rebecca Morrison. But, first, Elena had to convince 2 other bitter women to trust her with their lives. The ride down from Widow's Peak took Elena most of the day. She traveled slowly, using old Apache techniques to move without being observed or followed. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, the sun was setting and the windows of the Broken Wheel Saloon glowed with lamplight. Elena tied her horse to the hitching post and paused before entering. Through the window, she could see a small crowd gathered around a corner table. Samuel Morrison sat with his back to the wall, looking older and more worn than she remembered. Across from him sat 2 women she recognized from descriptions but had never met in person. Catherine O'Malley was smaller than Elena had expected, but there was something coiled and dangerous in the way she moved. Her red hair was pulled back severely, and her green eyes missed nothing as they scanned the room. She wore men's clothes and had a gun belt around her waist, but there was nothing masculine about her bearing. Dr. Margaret Hartwell was elegant even in traveling clothes, her graying hair perfectly arranged and her posture indicating years of education and refinement. But Elena could see the steel in her gray eyes as she looked at Morrison, and the careful way she positioned herself suggested she was no stranger to danger. Elena took a deep breath and pushed through the saloon doors. The conversation at the corner table stopped as every eye in the room turned to her. She walked across the floor with the smooth, silent stride that had made her legendary among both whites and Apaches, her dark eyes fixed on the 3 people who might hold the key to an impossible mission. Samuel Morrison rose as she approached, his face showing a mixture of hope, fear, and something that might have been shame. "Elena," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." Elena ignored him and addressed the 2 women at the table. "Catherine O'Malley and Dr. Margaret Hartwell, I assume." "I'm Elena Vasquez. I understand we have a mutual acquaintance with questionable judgment." Cat O'Malley's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That's one way to put it. Please, sit down. We were just discussing the many reasons why helping Sam Morrison is the worst idea any of us has ever had." Elena pulled out a chair and sat down, her rifle leaning against the table within easy reach. "And yet you're both here." Dr. Hartwell spoke for the first time, her voice cultured but carrying undertones of steel. "We're here because an innocent young woman's life is at stake. Not because any of us has forgiven this man for his past behavior." Elena nodded slowly. "Good. I was afraid sentiment might cloud your judgment." Morrison cleared his throat. "Ladies, I know I have no right to ask for your help. I know I've wronged each of you in different ways. But Rebecca is innocent in all of this. She doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Elena studied his face carefully. The arrogant, self-assured rancher she remembered was gone, replaced by a broken man desperate enough to beg for help from women he had once treated as enemies. It was a remarkable transformation, but Elena wondered if it was genuine or just another manipulation. "Tell us about your daughter," Elena said. "Not the ransom demand, not your desperate situation. Tell us about Rebecca as a person." Morrison's face softened slightly. "She's 22 years old, and she's everything I'm not. Kind, generous, thoughtful. She runs a school for children whose families can't afford to send them to the regular school. She tends to sick animals and feeds anyone who shows up at our door hungry. She's never judged anyone by their race or background, never thought she was better than anyone else despite having every advantage. Cat O'Malley leaned forward. And, what makes you think the three of us can succeed where the law has failed? Morrison looked each woman in the eye before answering. Because you're not bound by the same rules as the law. Because you're smart enough and skilled enough to outthink them instead of trying to outgun them. And, because you understand what it means to be underestimated. Dr. Hartwell nodded slowly. The Crimson Creek gang won't expect three women to come after them. They'll be watching for posses and federal marshals, not a tracker, a thief, and a doctor. Exactly, Morrison said. Elena knows their patterns and hideouts better than anyone. Cat can get you into places that are supposed to be secure. And, Margaret, your medical skills could save all of our lives. Elena was quiet for several minutes, studying the faces around the table. Finally, she spoke. If we agree to this, and I'm not saying we will, what exactly are you proposing? Are we supposed to sneak into their camp, steal your daughter, and escape without being caught? Or are we planning to actually pay the ransom? Morrison hesitated. I have a plan for getting the $50,000, but it involves significant risk. What kind of risk? Dr. Hartwell asked sharply. Morrison glanced around the room, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. The Denver Pacific Railroad is shipping Army payroll through here in 6 days. 100,000 in federal gold. I'm planning to take it. The three women exchanged glances. Cat O'Malley whistled softly. You're talking about robbing a train. That's a federal crime punishable by death. I know what I'm talking about, Morrison said quietly. And I know what the consequences might be. But it's the only way to get that much money in the time we have left. Elena leaned back in her chair. So your plan is to commit one crime to undo the consequences of another. What happens when the federal marshals come looking for the train robbers? They'll be looking for men, Morrison replied. Professional outlaws with a history of robbery. They won't be looking for a desperate father and three women with legitimate grievances. Dr. Hartwell shook her head. Samuel, what you're proposing is madness. Even if we could successfully rob a train, even if we could track down the gang and pay the ransom, what makes you think they'd honor the deal? Men like Black Jack Cordova don't exactly have reputations for keeping their word. Morrison's face grew grim. Because I have something else they want. Information about other wealthy ranchers who might be worth kidnapping. I'll offer to provide them with intelligence about potential targets in exchange for Rebecca's safe return. Cat O'Malley stared at him with something approaching admiration. You're willing to help them target other families to save your own daughter? I'm willing to tell them whatever they want to hear to get Rebecca back safely, Morrison replied. What they do with that information afterward is between them and their intended victims. Elena understood now why Morrison thought he needed women for this mission. It wasn't just about their skills, though those were important. It was about their willingness to operate outside the moral constraints that would limit men with reputations to protect. Morrison was asking them to become criminals, but he was also offering them something that could change their lives forever. Your ranch, Elena said. 20,000 acres, plus mineral rights. You'd really sign that over to the three of us? Morrison nodded. Equal shares. 7,000 acres each, plus a third of any mining revenues. It's worth more than $100,000 at current land prices. Dr. Hartwell looked skeptical. And what would you do afterward? Where would you live? Morrison's smile was sad. I'd go wherever Rebecca wants to go. Maybe California, maybe back east. Start over somewhere nobody knows our names. Elena could see the logic in Morrison's thinking, but she could also see the flaws. What if your daughter doesn't survive? What if the gang kills her before we can pay the ransom? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll spend whatever time I have left hunting down every member of the Crimson Creek gang. But, at least I'll know I tried everything possible to save her. The determination in his voice was absolute, and Elena realized that Samuel Morrison had already accepted that this mission would probably cost him his life. He wasn't asking them to help him get his daughter back and return to his old life. He was asking them to help him ensure that his daughter survived, even if he didn't. Kat O'Malley drummed her fingers on the table. So let's say we agree to this madness. How do you propose we rob a train without getting ourselves killed? Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded map. The train has to slow down to climb Devil's Grade about 20 miles east of here. It's a steep, winding track through mountain passes. Perfect place for an ambush. Elena studied the map. She knew the area well, and Morrison was right about the terrain. A small group could control the pass and stop the train without having to outgun a large escort. How many guards? Dr. Hartwell asked. Usually 4 or 5, Morrison replied. Federal marshals, well armed but not expecting trouble this far from the main outlaw territories. Elena looked at Kat and Margaret. This is insane. You know that, don't you? Kat O'Malley grinned for the first time since Elena had arrived. Honey, I've been waiting my whole life for a chance to get rich while sticking it to the federal government. Count me in. Dr. Hartwell was silent for several minutes. Finally, she sighed. I took an oath to preserve life. If there's even a chance we can save Rebecca Morrison, then I suppose I have to try. Elena looked around the table one more time. 3 women with every reason to hate Samuel Morrison, agreeing to risk their lives for his daughter. It was either the most noble thing she had ever been part of, or the most foolish. All right, she said finally. I'm in. But we do this my way, with my rules. And, Morrison, if you lie to us even once, if you hold back any information that could get us killed, I'll leave you to face Blackjack Cordova alone. Morrison nodded gratefully. I understand. And, ladies, whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm grateful for this chance. More grateful than I have any right to be. As the 4 of them bent over the map to plan what might be the most dangerous mission any of them had ever attempted, Elena wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But, as she thought about 8-year-old Maria sleeping safely at her aunt's house, she knew she couldn't live with herself if she let another girl suffer a fate she had the power to prevent. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Elena's grandmother had always said. Tomorrow, she would find out if Samuel Morrison had truly destroyed his weak self, or if his desperation was just another form of selfishness that would get them all killed. The Denver Pacific train rounded the curve at Devil's Grade precisely at 2:15 in the afternoon, just as the railroad timetable had promised. Elena Vasquez lay flat against the rocky outcrop overlooking the tracks, her rifle trained on the locomotive. 50 yards to her left, Kat O'Malley crouched behind a fallen tree with a bag full of dynamite charges. Dr. Margaret Hartwell waited with the horses in a hidden canyon another 100 yards away, ready to treat any wounded and serve as their escape route. Samuel Morrison stood directly on the tracks, his hands raised high above his head and a white flag tied to his rifle. The plan was simple: stop the train, take the gold, and disappear before the federal marshals could organize a pursuit. Elena had insisted on Morrison being the one to expose himself to the guards' guns. If anyone deserved to take the greatest risk, it was the man who had created this desperate situation. The locomotive's whistle screamed as the engineer spotted Morrison on the tracks. Steam hissed and brakes shrieked against steel as the massive train began to slow. Elena could see armed men moving inside the passenger car behind the locomotive, federal marshals preparing to deal with what appeared to be a lone bandit foolish enough to attempt a daylight robbery. Remember, Elena called out, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, we want the gold, not a gunfight. No one shoots unless they shoot first. Morrison lowered his white flag and cupped his hands around his mouth. Federal officers. I need to speak with you about the gold shipment. This is not a robbery. The train ground to a complete stop about 30 feet from where Morrison stood. Elena could see the barrels of rifles protruding from the windows of the passenger car. A door opened and 3 federal marshals stepped out onto the platform, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed. You've got 30 seconds to explain yourself before we arrest you for interfering with federal commerce, shouted the lead marshal, a tall man with graying hair and a star pinned to his vest. Morrison kept his hands visible as he approached the train. "Marshal, my name is Samuel Morrison. My daughter was kidnapped by the Crimson Creek gang 3 days ago. They're demanding $50,000 in ransom, and I need that gold to save her life." The marshal's expression didn't change. "That's a tragedy, Mr. Morrison, but it doesn't give you the right to rob federal property. Step away from the train." "I'm not trying to rob you," Morrison said desperately. "I'm offering to buy the gold. I'll give you my ranch deed as collateral. 20,000 acres worth more than the gold you're carrying." Elena could see the marshals exchanging glances. This clearly wasn't the type of train robbery they had been expecting. The lead marshal gestured for Morrison to approach slowly. "Let's see this deed you're talking about," the marshal said. Morrison reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the folded document. As he handed it to the marshal, Elena caught a glimpse of movement on the ridge above the train. Her blood went cold as she recognized the silhouettes of mounted men positioning themselves to observe the proceedings. "Cat," she hissed, knowing O'Malley would hear her. "We've got company on the North Ridge. At least 6 riders." Through her rifle scope, Elena could make out the distinctive black clothing and silver conchos that marked members of the Crimson Creek gang. Black Jack Cordova himself sat on a magnificent black stallion, watching the scene below with obvious amusement. The lead marshal was examining Morrison's deed with growing interest. "This land is worth a fortune. But I can't just trade federal gold for private property, even if the paperwork is legitimate." "Then, what would it take?" Morrison asked, his voice cracking with desperation. "A court order, proper authorization from the territorial governor, and about 6 months of paperwork," the marshal replied. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I can't help you." Elena made a split-second decision. The gang was here, which meant they had been watching Morrison's movements. This might be their only chance to get close to them without having to track them through hundreds of miles of wilderness. She fired a single shot into the air. The sound echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Every head turned toward her position as she stood up on the rocky outcrop, her rifle clearly visible but not pointed at anyone. "Marshal," she called out, "you might want to look at the ridge behind you before you make any final decisions." The lawmen spun around, their weapons swinging toward the north ridge. Elena heard Morrison curse under his breath as he spotted the watching outlaws. Black Jack Cordova urged his horse forward until he was clearly visible against the skyline. Even at a distance, Elena could see his cruel smile beneath his black hat. He raised one hand in a mocking salute. "Samuel Morrison." Cordova's voice carried clearly across the canyon. "How thoughtful of you to arrange delivery of our gold to such a convenient location." The lead marshal's face went pale. "Sweet Jesus, it's Black Jack Cordova." Elena kept her rifle ready as she scrambled down from her position. Cat O'Malley emerged from her hiding place with her bag of explosives, and Dr. Hartwell appeared leading their horses. Morrison stood frozen between the train and the approaching outlaws, realizing that his desperate gambit had failed spectacularly. "Marshal," Elena said as she approached the group, "I'm Elena Vasquez. I tracked the Crimson Creek gang for 3 years. If you want to live through the next 10 minutes, you'll listen to what I have to say." The marshal's eyes widened with recognition. "Elena Vasquez? The tracker who got closest to these bastards than anyone else?" "That's right. And, right now, they think they're about to collect $50,000 in federal gold plus whatever ransom they can get for Morrison's daughter. They've got us outnumbered and outgunned." Cordova had begun riding down the slope toward the train, followed by his gang members. Elena counted 8 men, all heavily armed and riding with the confidence of predators who had cornered their prey. "What do you suggest?" the marshal asked grimly. Elena looked at Cat O'Malley, who nodded and began pulling dynamite sticks from her bag. "Cat's going to create a distraction. When she does, everyone gets behind the train for cover. Dr. Hartwell will set up a field hospital in the passenger car. Morrison and I will try to negotiate with Cordova." "Negotiate?" Morrison stared at her in disbelief. Elena, he's got my daughter. He's not going to negotiate anything. He might, if we offer him something better than $50,000, Elena replied. She turned to the marshal. How much gold is really on this train? 100,000 in federal coins, the marshal admitted. Army payroll for 3/4. Elena nodded grimly. Cordova doesn't know the exact amount. We're going to convince him it's twice that much, and that he can have it all in exchange for Rebecca Morrison and safe passage for everyone here. Black Jack Cordova reached the bottom of the slope and spurred his horse toward the train. He was exactly what Elena had expected, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of predatory handsomeness that probably made some women forget how dangerous he was. His gang spread out behind him in a semicircle, cutting off any escape routes. Well, Cordova said, his voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. Samuel Morrison, the great cattle baron. And he's brought friends. His dark eyes fixed on Elena. Including the famous Elena Vasquez. I've heard stories about you, Lady Tracker. Elena stepped forward, keeping her hands visible but ready to draw her weapon. Black Jack Cordova. I've been tracking you for 3 years. You're smaller than I expected. Cordova laughed, a sound like breaking glass. And you're prettier than I expected. Perhaps we can do business together after we finish with Morrison. Perhaps we can, Elena said calmly. That depends on whether you're interested in 200,000 in federal gold instead of 50,000 in ransom money. Cordova's smile faltered slightly. 200,000? The train manifests I've seen don't show that much cargo. The manifests lie, Elena said smoothly. The Army has been shipping extra payroll secretly to fund operations against Apache bands. This train is carrying enough gold to finance a small war. Elena could see Cordova's greed warring with his suspicion. Behind her, she heard Cat O'Malley moving into position with her explosives. Dr. Hartwell was quietly organizing the federal marshals for a possible firefight. Even if that's true, Cordova said slowly, what makes you think I'd trade Rebecca Morrison for gold? She's worth more to me than money. Morrison stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and fear. If you've hurt her, I'll kill you with my bare hands. Cordova's hand dropped to his gun but... Careful, old man. Your daughter is alive and unharmed, for now. But her continued health depends on your cooperation. Elena moved slightly to her left, positioning herself between Morrison and Cordova. The girl is worth nothing to you dead, and a living hostage is a liability when you're trying to transport 200,000 in gold. Make the trade, take the money, and disappear into Mexico. You'll be rich enough to buy a dozen pretty girls. Cordova considered this for a long moment. Elena could see him calculating odds and advantages. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well. But I want to see the gold first. And if you're lying about the amount, the girl dies and so do all of you. Elena gestured toward the train. The gold is in the mail car. But I want to see Rebecca first. Fair trade. Cordova whistled sharply, and one of his gang members rode forward leading a second horse. Rebecca Morrison sat on the saddle, her hands bound but otherwise unharmed. She was a beautiful young woman with her father's strong jawline and her mother's gentle eyes, and Elena could see why Cordova might want to keep her for himself. Rebecca! Morrison started forward, but Elena grabbed his arm. Not yet, she murmured. Let's see the gold first, just as he wants to see the girl. The lead marshal nodded to his men, who unlocked the mail car and slid the heavy door open. Inside were several wooden crates marked with Army insignia. Elena knew there was only half as much gold as she had claimed, but she was gambling that Cordova wouldn't take the time to count it carefully. Cordova rode closer to examine the cargo. Open one of the crates. One of the marshals pried open a crate with his knife, revealing neat stacks of gold coins. Cordova's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Acceptable, he said. Now we make the trade. But I want the tracker woman to come with us. Elena Vasquez would be a valuable addition to my organization. Elena felt her blood turn to ice. This hadn't been part of her plan. I'm not part of the deal, Cordova. You are now, Cordova replied, his hand resting on his gun. The girl for the gold and the tracker. Take it or leave it. Morrison's face went white. Elena, I can't ask you to sacrifice yourself for my daughter. You're not asking, Elena said quietly. I'm volunteering. She turned to face Cordova directly. But, I have conditions. The girl goes free, unharmed. Morrison and everyone else here gets safe passage. And, if you try to double-cross any of us, I'll put a bullet in your head before your men can draw their guns. Cordova's laugh was genuinely amused. I like you already, Elena Vasquez. Very well, we have a deal. Elena looked back at Morrison, Cat O'Malley, and Dr. Hartwell. Get Rebecca out of here. Take care of each other. And, remember that sometimes destroying your weak self means accepting that you can't save everyone. But, as Elena prepared to walk toward certain death or worse, Cat O'Malley stepped forward with a lit dynamite stick in her hand. Actually, Cat said conversationally, I've got a better idea. The explosion shattered the morning air as Cat hurled the dynamite toward the rocky overhang above Cordova's position. Elena threw herself flat as tons of rock and debris came crashing down, creating a wall of dust and confusion. Gunfire erupted from both sides as the federal marshals opened up on the scattered gang members. When the dust settled, 3 of Cordova's men were dead and 2 more were wounded. Cordova himself was trapped beneath his fallen horse, his leg clearly broken. The remaining gang members had fled back up the ridge, leaving their leader behind. Elena picked herself up and walked over to where Black Jack Cordova lay pinned and helpless. She pointed her rifle at his head. Where are the rest of your gang's hideouts? She asked calmly. Cordova spat blood and dirt. Go to hell, woman. Elena cocked her rifle. I've been tracking your gang for 3 years. I know about the canyon hideout near Dead Horse Creek. I know about the cave system in the Sangre Mountains. What I don't know is where you keep your stolen gold and where you hold other prisoners. Tell me, and you live to stand trial. Don't tell me, and I leave you here for the buzzards. Cordova's face went pale as he realized Elena knew far more about his operations than he had suspected. You've been hunting us for 3 years? My brother Carlos, Elena said quietly. You killed him when he stumbled onto your camp while tracking stolen horses. He was 18 years old and had never hurt anyone in his life. I've been waiting 3 years for this moment. Recognition dawned in Cordova's eyes. Carlos Vasquez was your brother? That boy who tried to run when we caught him spying on us? Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. He wasn't spying. He was doing an honest day's work for an honest man's cattle. You murdered him because you were afraid he'd seen your faces. Elena. Dr. Hartwell's voice was calm but firm. Don't do this. Let the law handle him. Elena looked down at the man who had terrorized the territory for 3 years, who had killed her brother and kidnapped Rebecca Morrison and God knew how many others. It would be so easy to pull the trigger and end it all. Instead, she lowered her rifle. You're right, Margaret. The law should handle him. She looked down at Cordova. But, if you ever escape, if you ever come after me or my family or anyone I care about, I'll hunt you down and finish what we started here. Samuel Morrison was kneeling beside his daughter, who was shaken but unharmed. Rebecca looked up at Elena with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know how to repay you for this. Elena helped her to her feet. You don't need to repay anything. Just live a good life and remember that sometimes people can change for the better. Morrison approached Elena slowly, his hat in his hands. Elena, I owe you more than I can ever repay. I know I wronged your family, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but Elena held up her hand to stop him. Samuel Morrison, for 3 years I've hated you for what you did to my brother and me. I let that hatred consume me, drive me away from people who cared about me. Today I learned that my enemy was never you. It was my own inability to forgive. She looked around at Cat O'Malley, who was bandaging a wounded federal marshal, and Dr. Hartwell, who was checking Rebecca for injuries. "Your daughter is safe. Your ranch deed is still yours. And, maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get a chance to be the man she deserves as a father." Morrison's eyes filled with tears. "What about the deed? I promised to sign it over to you three ladies." Elena smiled for the first time in days. "Keep your ranch, Morrison. But, remember this debt. When Cat or Margaret or I need help, you'd better be there for us. No questions asked, no conditions." Cat O'Malley looked up from her patient. "Speak for yourself, honey." "I could use 7,000 acres of prime grazing land." Dr. Hartwell laughed. "Catherine, what would you do with a cattle ranch?" "Sell it and retire to San Francisco," Cat replied promptly. "I'm getting too old for this excitement." Elena found herself laughing as well, surprising everyone including herself. "Fine. We'll discuss the details later. Right now, we need to get Rebecca somewhere safe and Black Jack Cordova to the territorial prison." The lead marshal, his arm in a makeshift sling, approached the group. "Ladies, I don't know how to thank you. What you did here today will save a lot of lives. The territorial government has been trying to capture Cordova for 2 years." Elena nodded. "Just make sure he stands trial. And, Marshal, when you write your report, remember that Samuel Morrison was trying to save his daughter's life. That should count for something." As the group prepared to leave Devil's Grade, Elena looked back at the scattered remains of the Crimson Creek Gang. In one afternoon, they had rescued Rebecca Morrison, captured the most wanted outlaw in the territory, and ended a reign of terror that had lasted 3 years. More importantly, Elena had learned something about herself. For 3 years, she had carried hatred and resentment like a poison in her soul. Today, she had chosen to let go of that poison. Not because Samuel Morrison deserved forgiveness, but because she deserved to be free of the burden that hatred had become. The ride back to town took most of the evening. Rebecca Morrison rode beside her father, holding his hand and talking quietly about her ordeal. She had been treated well by the gang members who had guarded her, she said, but she had never doubted that Black Jack Cordova would eventually sell her to the highest bidder. Cat O'Malley regaled Dr. Hartwell with stories of her criminal career, while Margaret shared tales of her medical practice in Denver. Despite the danger they had faced, there was an atmosphere of celebration among the group. They had accomplished something that federal marshals and army patrols had failed to do. As they reached the outskirts of town, Elena found herself riding beside Samuel Morrison. He looked older than his years, worn down by stress and guilt, but there was also a peace in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. When I accused your brother of rustling my cattle, I knew there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. I was angry about the thefts, and Carlos was a convenient target because he was Mexican and had no powerful friends to defend him." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I learned something about myself today," Morrison replied. "I learned that a man can't run from his mistakes forever. Eventually, they catch up with him, and, when they do, he has to choose whether to keep running or stand and face the consequences." Elena nodded slowly. "And what choice are you making?" Morrison's smile was sad but genuine. "I'm choosing to stand. I can't undo the harm I did to your family, but I can try to do better going forward. Starting with keeping my word about that ranch deed." Elena looked ahead to where Rebecca Morrison was laughing at something Cat O'Malley had said. The young woman had been through a terrible ordeal, but she seemed remarkably resilient. She had her father's strength and her mother's kindness, and Elena thought she would probably grow up to be an exceptional woman. "Keep your ranch, Samuel," Elena said finally. "But remember what you learned today. And remember that your daughter is watching how you treat people who are different from you, people who have less power than you do. Be the man she deserves as a father." Morrison nodded solemnly. "I will. And, Elena, if you ever need anything at all, you just have to ask." As they rode into town, Elena was already thinking about the future. She would return to her cabin on Widow's Peak, to her daughter Maria and the peaceful life they had built together. But she would also remember that sometimes, helping others was the best way to heal old wounds. The Broken Wheel Saloon was packed when their group arrived. Word of their success had somehow traveled ahead of them, and the entire town seemed to have gathered to hear the story. Elena found herself reluctantly accepting congratulations from men who had ignored her when she lived in the valley. Cat O'Malley held court at the bar, already embellishing their adventure for an appreciative audience. Dr. Hartwell was examining injured townspeople who had been waiting for medical attention. Rebecca Morrison was surrounded by friends and well-wishers, all relieved to see her safely home. Elena slipped out of the crowd and stepped onto the saloon's front porch, where she could look up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about her brother Carlos, who had died so young and so senselessly. She thought about her daughter Maria, sleeping safely at her aunt's house. And she thought about the choices that had led her to this moment. Samuel Morrison joined her on the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want something warm," he said, offering her one of the cups. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the celebration inside the saloon and watching the stars grow brighter overhead. "Elena," Morrison said eventually, "what you said about destroying your weak self. What did you mean by that?" Elena considered the question carefully. "My grandmother used to say that every person has 2 selves, the weak self that's driven by fear, anger, and selfishness, and the strong self that chooses courage, forgiveness, and sacrifice. The weak self keeps us trapped in the past, repeating the same mistakes over and over. The strong self learns from the past but isn't controlled by it." Morrison nodded slowly. "And you think I destroyed my weak self today?" "I think you started to," Elena replied. "The man who accused my brother of rustling cattle was driven by anger and pride. The man who was willing to give up everything to save his daughter was driven by love. That's the difference between your weak self and your strong self." Morrison was quiet for a long time. "What about you? Did you destroy your weak self?" Elena smiled. "I'm working on it. For 3 years, my weak self told me that hating you was justice for my brother's death. Today my strong self realized that hatred was just another form of prison. Carlos wouldn't want me to spend my life hating his killer when I could be spending it loving my daughter." Inside the saloon, someone had started playing guitar, and voices were raised in an old frontier ballad about cowboys and cattle drives and the romance of the open range. Elena found herself humming along, surprised to discover that some of her anger had indeed died on Devil's Grade. "Elena," Morrison said suddenly, "I want you to know that I'm going to make sure everyone knows what really happened to your brother. I'm going to clear his name publicly, and I'm going to make sure the real rustlers are brought to justice." Elena looked at him in surprise. "After 3 years? The trail is cold, Samuel." "Maybe, but I owe it to Carlos's memory to try. And I owe it to you and Maria." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of pain she had carried for so long that she had forgotten it was there. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means more than you know." As the evening wore on, Elena found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been a bitter woman living alone on a mountain, avoiding human contact and nursing old grievances. Tonight, she was sitting on a saloon porch with the man she had hated for 3 years, feeling something that might actually be peace. Cat O'Malley emerged from the saloon, slightly drunk and thoroughly pleased with herself. "Elena, my dear, you're missing a hell of a party in there. Half the town wants to buy you drinks, and the other half wants to marry you." Elena laughed. "I think I'll pass on both offers. I need to get back to Maria soon." Dr. Hartwell joined them on the porch, looking tired but satisfied. "I've treated 3 broken bones, 2 knife wounds, and 1 case of food poisoning tonight. This town definitely needed a doctor." Morrison looked up hopefully. "Margaret, have you given any thought to staying? We could use a permanent doctor here, and I meant what I said about the ranch deed." Margaret smiled, but shook her head. "I have a practice in Denver, Samuel. patients who depend on me. But, I'll visit from time to time, and, if there's ever a medical emergency here, send word and, I'll come. Cat O'Malley flopped down in a chair with theatrical exhaustion. Well, ladies, it's been a pleasure working with you, but I think it's time for me to get back to civilization. No offense, but this town is a little too quiet for my taste. Elena stood up and stretched, feeling muscles she had forgotten she had. I should head home too. Maria will be wondering where I am. Morrison rose as well. Elena, I hope this isn't goodbye forever. You'll always be welcome here, both you and your daughter. Elena studied his face in the lamplight from the saloon windows. The proud, arrogant rancher was gone, replaced by a man who had learned humility the hard way. It was a remarkable transformation, and Elena found herself hoping it would last. Samuel, she said, I think my grandmother would have liked you. Eventually. She always said that a man who could admit his mistakes was a man worth knowing. Morrison's smile was genuinely warm. I would have liked to meet her. Maybe she could have taught me some of her wisdom about destroying weak selves. Elena mounted her horse, settling into the familiar comfort of her own saddle. The wisdom was always there, Samuel. You just had to be ready to hear it. As Elena rode out of town toward the mountain trail that led home, she thought about the events of the last few days. She had helped rescue an innocent girl, captured a dangerous criminal, and, maybe most importantly, learned to forgive a man she had hated for years. But, the most important lesson might have been the one about herself. For 3 years, Elena had defined herself as the victim of Samuel Morrison's injustice. Tonight, she was defining herself as a woman who chose forgiveness over hatred, hope over despair, and love over fear. The ride up to Widow's Peak took most of the night, but Elena didn't mind. The stars were bright, her horse was sure-footed on the familiar trail, and, for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace with herself and the world. When she finally reached her sister's house where Maria was staying, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Her daughter ran out to meet her, chattering excitedly about her adventures with her aunt and cousins. Mama, Maria said as Elena lifted her into a hug, did you catch the bad men? Elena smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. Yes, Mija. We caught the bad men. And, more importantly, we saved a girl who needed our help. Good, Maria said with the absolute certainty of childhood. I knew you would. You always keep people safe. As Elena held her daughter close, watching the sun rise over the mountains that had become their sanctuary, she thought about the future. There would be other challenges, other choices between strength and weakness, forgiveness and hatred, hope and despair. But, for now, she was content to be home with her daughter, knowing that she had helped write a story of redemption and second chances. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, her grandmother had always said. Today, Elena finally understood what that meant.